Hey there, and welcome to the Total Potential Podcast. Back with Cole today. And I'm so excited to share this conversation with our guest today, Victoria Fenton. Victoria is a functional and performance medicine consultant. She is a human design and gene keys expert. You guys, I cannot wait to get into that with her today. A transformational master coach. She really bridges the world of science and spirituality in a way that allows people to heal in a very holistic fashion. She also trains other holistic coaches as part of her professional mission to create empowered, self aware, and multi skilled healers who can aid in the resolution of suffering for others. Victoria is an absolute wealth of knowledge, and we have a chance today to talk about all things from a functional perspective, nervous system perspective, gut biome perspective for our kids. So let's go ahead and jump in. Hey, Victoria, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
I am so excited. I just told Victoria this, but she's going to get to hear it again that I recently had the chance to be on her podcast, which was such a fun conversation. But the whole time we were talking, I kept thinking to myself, I simply have to know more about what this woman does. I'm so fascinated. And we were talking more about families, and these little glimpses came up of things that you do to support kids. And that just really struck me as something that could be a few light bulb moments for people in our audience, as well as just almost like a pat on the back of there's not only one answer, and there's lots of ways to go about supporting our kiddos. So I'm just super excited to have you here.
Sure.
But before we get rolling into like the real meat of today,
Mhm.
how did you ever wind your way
Right.
into this functional medicine world? Like, what were some of the more formative things that brought you to this space?
Sure. Well, in essence, my own illness brought me to this space.
Mm.
So, at its heart, I got very, very unwell when I was 17 years old and with a mystery illness, but that was diagnosed at the time as an eating disorder.
Mm.
What actually happened is that I ruptured my esophagus and eventually just couldn't keep food down and kept being sick. And there was a whole decade of chaos in that. And to save your listeners the kind of all of the ins and outs, it was a horrendous time of trying to find answers, trying to find a diagnosis, not believing what the medical professionals said, but not really having any other leg to stand on, any other kind of wisdom. And eventually, through a series of fortuitous twists and turns, found a diagnosis. And I actually have a genetic connective tissue disorder, which
Oh,
comes along
wow.
or can come along with a host of associated comorbidities, is what we call them. So just issues that tend to map together. And so I was diagnosed after having no diagnosis for a decade. I had like about five in a week or two.
Oh my
Um,
goodness.
right. And I thought diagnosis equals answers equals solutions.
Mhm.
Yay, we're there. And unfortunately, that just wasn't what happened. So I had these labels and they recommended some medications, all of which I reacted to terribly and was like, okay, so now what? And that is how I found functional medicine. And so I found it from the perspective of needing to help myself.
Mm.
Never intended to get into healthcare, really didn't want to. From all of the illness, wanted to run as far away from healthcare as possible, but had studied so much during both my illness and the no diagnosis decade, and then just to get myself back onto an even keel, that was mostly around nutrition and biochemical pathways and mechanisms and supplementation regimens. And because I was a really complicated case, I had to learn the entire field, basically.
Right.
And then got to the point where I was like, well, people keep asking me for this. Why don't I just do this as a job? And that's where it started. And I started very small, just doing kind of nutrition consultations, actually working alongside a psychiatrist.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and so learned a lot about psychopharmacology and the interplay between this stuff. So kind of found myself in this weird space within functional medicine where I understood how to map alongside conventional treatments the more complementary medical protocols. and so became this rather unique specimen in functional medicine, and ended up working in London in a very high profile clinic originally, and then setting up my own practice on Harley Street, which I ran for about 7 years,
Wow.
which basically just became the refuge for anyone with complex chronic illness, but also stranger things. So oncology used to be part of my practice, and also pediatrics. And the reason pediatrics is because I never saw this as this is a condition, therefore this is the solution. I was always very much first principles, root cause, and founded my entire practice on the nervous system, which meant that a child's nervous system I could understand. And that's the way I approached my pediatric practice as well as my adults. And I found very much that everything has cross-fertilization capacity. It's just everything makes sense as long as you look at it from a first principles perspective. And unfortunately, in functional medicine, not a lot of people want to take on pediatrics because it's seen to have a risk associated with it, because it's mothers and children, or parents and children, but more often
Yeah.
for me, it's mothers and children.
Yeah. Say, before we dive into some of the more kid specific stuff, say a little bit
Mm.
more about this first principles perspective. I think that's going to be new for a lot of people.
Yeah, so everything I do operates from that perspective when I train my coaches, when I work with my clients. And so if you look at the body from a systems biology perspective, which is essentially what functional medicine is, it's this idea that we are a set of interconnected systems. A lot of functional medicine works from the systems. So you've got a gastrointestinal system issue, or you've got a hormone system, endocrine system issue, etc. And there's about 7 systems, maybe a few more. And still within functional medicine education, I found that the training was very siloed in those systems. So, and that's true of conventional medicine. We have the specialist, we go to the gastroenterologist for the gut stuff, and we go to the rheumatologist for the skin stuff. And it never made sense to me, basically because I had this laundry list of diagnosis which spanned the gamut. And I'd go to my rheumatologist, who wouldn't speak to my neurologist, who wouldn't speak to my immunologist, who wouldn't speak to my gastro. And I was like, why am I the link between all of my professionals?
Right.
And then I got to this first principles idea of, okay, so these systems are interconnected. What is interconnecting them? And that's the nervous system. The nervous system is the central governing command center of the human being and its orientation to the world around it. So you can kind of look at this from the perspective of, yes, there can be an error in one system, but that has a knock-on effect in all the other systems. And if we go back to root cause, really root cause, in almost all, if not absolutely all cases, we're looking at a nervous system communication orientation issue, i.e. the way the vehicle, our body, is living within the lifestyle that we have and the world that we're living in. There's some kind of mismatch, which is leading to friction or resistance, which is leading to symptoms. And so I would get people in my clinic who've got a diagnosis, and I would be like, okay, so you've got this specific autoimmune condition, let's say, and I would never care about the label. I'm like, okay, so your immune system's got the wrong message about what it's supposed to do. This is because the nervous system has kind of gone into a stress state and created much more of a signal to fight. Therefore, okay, let's work on the nervous system, not the immune system, because the immune system is just the effect, not the cause.
Yeah. Now, the thing that really strikes me as I think about the nervous system of a young child is that it's still regulating all of the signals that it gets, right? As adults, we have the loops are so
Right.
ingrained, right? That once we have a certain stimulus outside of ourselves, we almost instantaneously feel this very specific internal reaction.
Yes.
But for kids, that isn't necessarily locked into place yet. So, what does that look like as they're navigating their nervous system and building these pathways and some of
Sure.
the things that come along with that?
Yeah, sure. Great question. And so my work with adults is a lot of those from various perspectives, and more using my somatic experiencing trauma kind of work and coaching, recalibrating some of those defaults. But as you say, there is a time when it becomes default. And so the trajectory tends to be between 0 to 3 is a very priming nervous system age. And gut biome, which we'll talk about as I'm sure today, but that's also very in flux during those years. 3 to 7 is still more formative. From 7, things are a bit more set. By the time you get to teenage years, we're pruning nervous system pathways. So this is when we think of teenage behavior and they're kind of pushing against all of the, authority and all of those things. What's actually happening is that the brain is trying to go, okay, we're going to try this pathway. Is it useful? And then the world gives the teenager feedback and the pruning starts to happen. From about 21 to 25, the neocortex is set. So we've got this we are one of the few mammals who's born completely unprepared for the world around it. Physically, like we are physically dependent for food, for like being able to walk, all those sorts of things. But also our nervous systems are designed to be built according to the world. And I think when we grasp that and we look at children, particularly that 0 to 7, those young children where it's still super evolutionarily based, it's a feedback mechanism. We've got these little beings who are trying to understand the world by almost feeling it, sensing it. And so what I ended up doing with a lot of my parents, because a lot of the parents would bring children to me with the child is the problem. And I'm like, or the nervous system recalibration that's happening is not safe for this child. There's some need that's not being met. There's some element of the environment that is over stimulating or over stressful or under nourishing, or like what is actually the holistic perspective of how is this nervous system receiving signals from the world around it? And as soon as you're thinking about it in that way, you look at all of the behavioral conditions that our kids are diagnosed with. You look at some of the issues that happen that are not there and then suddenly kick off when they get to school. And you're like, oh, this makes a lot more sense. There's this nervous system that is so sensitive. It's being formed as as the child is growing up. And then you put it in this modern world, which is bright lights, technology, everything is very loud. And I used to describe this to my parents of my children patients. It's like the world is so much louder now than it used to be when I was a child. Just so much louder. The amount of access to things, the reason, the whole reality that everything we access is through a machine that is, digitally based. And to be not exactly woo, but a bit more out there, everything that's a device has an electromagnetic frequency. Everything in your home, everything that you carry, just everything. And if you have Wi-Fi, especially the, amazing Google Fiber, 1,000,001
yes.
downloads per nanosecond, there's Wi-Fi signals everywhere. And so that is electromagnetic frequencies and radio frequencies that are brand new almost. If you're thinking human evolutionary,
Sure.
they are brand new, and we're electromagnetic beings. Every human has an electromagnetic frequency that in this modern world is expected to buffer all of the additional electromagnetic frequencies. And it's not that I want us to think, oh no, I need to wrap my child in cotton wool or bubble wrap or whatever it is, but just thinking about it this way, everything that we look at from a pediatric perspective is sort of understandable. We get into the perspective of, well, no wonder things are like this.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. And from an evolutionary perspective, right, our DNA are always adjusting to survive and be safe in their environment.
Yeah.
And from an evolutionary perspective, assault of technology, I don't know what else to call it. It's everywhere. I can only imagine the way our DNA is trying to catch up to that, let alone then regulate in the meantime in small bodies.
And we evolve, we're human beings that are essentially animals, and we evolve at the pace of nature. But our industrial revolution and then all of the technical revolution that's then happened is way faster than nature. So we've got this chronic mismatch of pace, essentially. We've got the world that's moving a gazillion miles an hour. And it's that weird thing of like, we now have this 24/7 news cycle, which doesn't move that fast. I mean, how many times have you put the 24/7 news channel on in the background and you catch every hourly bulletin and you're like, really? I heard this like 4 hours ago. But in the perspective of the world, it's still very fast. And we have constant access to it. And we've got these human organisms that we evolve incredibly slowly. The genetic code doesn't just update, but we
Right.
are epigenetically evolving moment to moment. So
Mm.
we are the way our genes are expressed will be in as an adaptive response to the environment around us. And
Right.
so we essentially are learning as we go and creating the genetic imprint that we will pass down to our children and on and on.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm hoping we can maybe talk a little bit more about that as this conversation
Mm,
unfolds, because that's something that's super fascinating to me. And from our perspective, something I'm really cognizant of. Like, as a parent, how am I supporting my child's ability to adapt in the current environment so that what they pass on through the family lines is genetic coding that's responsive in a healthy and useful way. So maybe we'll
yeah.
be able to circle back to that. So when you think, okay, so from this system perspective, what are some of the more common things that kids come to you for? You mentioned autoimmune disease. I'm guessing some behavioral things based on this.
Yep.
Now we're in school and we're seeing new things kind of situation.
Yeah.
What are some of the more common things that you see?
So a lot of it was behavioral issues, a lot of it, a dysregulated mood, we would say, or attention issues, a
Mm,
lot of multiple food sensitivities. So kids that were not just fussy eaters, although I did used to get my fair share of that, but kids who would absolutely react with hives, just sickness, any kind of response to nutritional intake of various
mm,
descriptions, or children who would have a behavioral response that was directly correlated to a nutritional intake would be common. And then also gastrointestinal issues. So a lot of my practice for adults and children was gastrointestinally based. And a lot of kids with chronic constipation or chronic diarrhea or, you know, couldn't get potty trained or, had accidents at school, all those sorts of things. That's the kind of the main things I saw in my clinic. And also, and it's a bit of a strange area to go, but children who had what was perceived to be vaccine injuries.
okay. So I'm super interested because to me, it's not actually possible to separate them because of the way the signaling is constantly going back and forth.
Precisely.
But can you speak to a little bit about this connection between what's happening in the gut and the signals that a kiddo's receiving and how that then displays itself through behavior or illness or whatever it is?
Absolutely. And that was the mainstay of a lot of the things that I did. And you're absolutely right. You cannot separate these things. Even the autoimmune conditions can come from a gastrointestinal and nervous system perspective. But essentially, the major highway for the gut brain connection is through the vagus nerve. So we have an enteric nervous system, which is entirely based within the gut. Actually, we found if you sever the gut, it can still do its thing on its own, which is kind of creepy to think about. But it has its
Indeed.
entire, it's a survival function. Like we need to know that we can still get nourishment, even if we can't control it, is essentially the take home from that. But it's not designed to work in isolation. Just because it can doesn't mean it should. So it's designed to work with feedback from the brain to the gut and vice versa. The whole reason for this being, if you think of the gastrointestinal system, all of the inside of the tubes of the gastrointestinal system, and it is one long tube from mouth to anus, it's all outside of us. So it's actually all
Mm.
exposing us to the outside world. So the moment you take something in your mouth and you chew it and you swallow, it's still in a tube which is completely isolated from the rest of the world.
Yeah. How have I never thought of this before? Oh
Yeah.
my goodness.
Well, and when you describe the complexity of this, the whole point of the gastrointestinal system is to take something that is technically the right nutrient and amino acid and fat components, break it all down, get rid of anything that doesn't serve us, translocate across this barrier the stuff that will, where the rest of our systems can assimilate it and make it into us
Mm,
cells.
mhm.
It's really complicated. It's like, who thought this up? I mean, it's genius, but also like, what? So when you think of it like that, that's what the gut is designed to do in various ways. And it is a lockstep function. We are designed to chew, which puts a load of enzymes and saliva and different stuff within the food that we're about to swallow. The esophagus transports it into our stomach. The stomach is designed to basically detoxify. It's really acidic. And so it's basically designed to kill everything that we don't want. There's loads of bacteria that we've just swallowed, basically. So it's designed to kill everything we don't want and break everything up significantly by actually just smashing it against the lower sphincter. And it's just the weirdest thing when you think about it, but that's what the stomach's doing.
Yeah.
Then the right pH of solution is supposed to head into the small intestine, where more enzymes and all sorts of bile and stuff like that is released to then help with the emulsification of fats, the breakdown of more of the amino acids and the nutrients. And then it travels through, and we're designed to absorb all of these molecules across the small intestinal barrier. And then we get to the large intestine, where everything's supposed to be pushed through. And mostly what we're doing in the large intestine and the colon is absorbing water just to get rid of the waste matter. Mm-hmm. Within all of that, we have a gut biome, which lives in the large intestine for the most part. It's the only place it's supposed to be, as in bacteria. So the bacteria are only supposed to live within that large intestinal bit, and they're designed to basically help us break down even more of those fibers to give us more stuff, more goodness. This whole system's built to get as much as possible out of the food that we eat, and then excrete it and get rid of it. So within that, that's a hell of a process. All of those bits work, right?
And all of those all bits, day long.
All day long, and also with breaks. So yes, there's no food. Oh, hang on a second, we just need to clean house. So there's a whole migrating motor complex that cleans the system when we're not actually doing the eating bit. So all of that's really dense in terms of energy demand and actual process. So all of that is governed by the autonomic nervous system. It's supposed to happen automatically, unconsciously, and completely without our conscious brain needing to pay any attention to it, which speaks to your earlier question of what's happening within children when there's this gut-brain connection and there's stuff happening. Anytime there's disruption in that flow, and anything that's supposed to be unconscious becomes conscious in a sort of, there's something wrong here. One of these speeds isn't working correctly. There's too much of this in the system. The acidity of the stomach isn't right, so the solution leaving it isn't going to create all of the right enzymatic reactions. The gut biome in particular isn't correct, so we're not doing that final step of liberating more nutrients. And potentially we're not creating the protective mechanisms, which is what those gut bacteria are supposed to do. So they create a lot of the gloopy lining, which protects the colon itself. So if that's not happening, you've essentially got food stuff sandpapering against the edge of your very, very thin gut lining. It's only one cell thick. So all of that creates conscious basically pain stuff, or less pain, actually. There's no pain receptors in the gut, but a conscious signaling from a gut that's supposed to have no messages. So if we whiz back to the environment's very loud, like stimulus coming towards us from every angle, and also internally our kiddos are having this kind of cacophony of noise from this enteric and autonomic nervous system, which is going, hang on a second, there's something wrong here and here and here and here, and this isn't, and hang on. They basically got this feedback into the brain from the gastrointestinal system of chaos, whatever it is, which is adding into their soup of neural signals that their brain is trying to make sense of 24/7. And that's the majority of the problem. So I never fully worked out whether, this was a gut biome cause originally. So there was something parasitic in the gut biome, and that was the causative factor. But I did certainly realize that there was a bidirectional relationship. And I knew that by resolving some of the noise from the gut, basically, if you've got, I'm a bit of a sound engineer geek, but if you've got an equalizer and you just pull the channels down that come from the gut, you have so much space for all of the other signaling and the making sense from the nervous system of all of the other inputs. So doing that for the children who have these behavioral issues, or, eczema, skin issues, a lot of those sorts of stuff, or autoimmune conditions, had almost seemingly miraculous results. And all you were doing was resolving one major set of issues.
Wow. I'm so curious to know, is it like the chicken or the egg? Or is it even separable? Like when a kiddo comes in to see you, is it something you sense into that it's a certain part of the gut? Is it certain food choices? Is it food behaviors? Like, how do you start to kind of pinpoint where this starting point even is? To your point, the complexity is endless.
Yes.
So what does that even look like? Because I'm sure there's families out there who have little kids, right? Who have seen their primary care doctor, who have maybe gone to some kind of a speech and language therapist person
Often,
or
yeah.
behavior therapist. I mean, who are trying to navigate this
Hmm.
and still don't have answers.
And it's so interesting because I really want to give a valuable answer. So I could sit here and say, oh, well, it depends and it's all person specific. And it kind of is to a degree. There's absolutely the kids who had really early courses of antibiotics. Their gut biomes have been kind of completely wiped out, essentially. And then the regrowth wasn't great. And so it's actually a gut biome issue when we need to be looking at probiotics and actually repopulating the gut in a healthy way. And so if that's the trajectory, we can look a little more simply. What I tended to think, and I think this is, we're on the fringes of what we know here, but I do think there are certain neurodivergent underlying tendencies, which are definitely partly genetic and definitely have this kind of legacy in there is a different way of processing the world. I think it's happening. We're seeing it much more. And then on top of that, there tends to just be almost a trauma response from a very young baby
Mm.
because the world is really loud. Like, and I will keep saying that because it's just the simplest way to say it. But you've kind of got this brain who's trying to pay attention to all of the potentials, and there's lots coming towards it. Even those moments of like, oh, the in-laws are coming around to visit and the entire family descend on this tiny little child, and there's just this little baby going because
Yeah.
it can't see properly yet. It's just like, and you're like, wow, that's a lot of energetic input. But essentially, with the nervous system like that, it learns to orient to the world from a I need to sense the threat perspective. And
Mm.
as soon as that nervous system's changed to hang on a second, the world might be threatening, you have almost an arrest function. So the way I like to explain this to keep it as simple as possible is that as soon as you're in that sympathetic overdrive, which is fight, flight, alert, okay, hang on, what's going to be there? Even if it's just a tiny fraction, just to be alert, you can feel that sense of slight freeze happen through the
Mm.
system. Because essentially what happens in sympathetic overdrive is like we're going to focus on running away or doing anything that's to fight or to run. The last place that gets blood or attention or energy is the gastrointestinal system. So you have that micro shift happen and you've got a micro slowdown of motility through the gut. And it doesn't take much if that starts really young to set up a cascade of problems that's going to then happen later down the line. And what we tend to find, what I think is the best thing to do is to stack protocols in
Mm.
terms of looking at the gut, looking at the world that this child is inhabiting, and how can we not just minimize the stresses, but actually adapt, allow the nervous system to adapt more to the world around it. And so the more I learn, the more I'm like, we should throw more at these children in terms of therapeutic support. Just because it isn't cause and effect, it isn't chicken and egg, it's soup of stuff. If we intervene in all, I mean, all of the cultures used to have a medicine wheel. And I always used to see it like a clock. So a clock with broken down into like 5-minute sections as you would on the hand of a watch. And all of those little places are ways to intervene into this holistic system. And
Mm.
you can absolutely for sure just do one, but why not do all of them? Because you're helping to support even more. The one thing that doesn't do is give parents the but what was it answer.
Mm.
And that tends to be a struggle at the beginning. But I tend to find over time, as the child's behavior changes and they're feeling better and looking better and thriving, parents tend to stop really minding what was the problem
Yeah.
and just focus on the outcome.
Yeah. I'm going to speak just a little bit to what you just said from a personal perspective, just
Mm.
because want to drive home this point that you just made. So, my oldest son had a sensory disorder. And I mean, by the time we got to an occupational therapist, I did not know Victoria at the time, or I would have immediately given her a call. Um, but by the time we got to an occupational therapist, he was 5 years old and we were on the
Mm.
struggle bus. He had
Yeah.
about 10 total foods that he would eat. And
Yeah.
I was a pediatric dietitian. Like, this was like my
Yeah.
wheelhouse, right?
Yeah.
And to your point about everyone around me wanted to know, well, what did they say is wrong with him? What has he
Interesting.
been diagnosed with? But I'm like, I don't care. I know that our lives are better every single day and
Yeah.
easier and more functional, and he's happier and he's calmer because we're doing this. So I
Yeah.
don't care what you want to call it, right? So to your point, like finding the answer. Who cares what label it has?
Yeah,
Just are we getting where we need to go? Because the the way our kids like then get to express themselves when they have the support that they need and the way they get to show up in the world that clearly looks so much more like them.
right. Yeah. And I think the finding the label thing is I have a dual relationship with it. So
Sure.
finding the label is a very conventional medicine approach that's reductionist in nature. It seeks to say, well, this state of dysregulation must have a diagnosis because then it's explicable. But also in America, particularly, we can bill for insurance for it.
Right, right, right.
It just actually doesn't have anything to do with what's actually happening in the physiological system. And I developed this weird skill of you can give me like literally any diagnosis that's a label, and I can pretty much tell you the complex cascade of things that are leading to that because it's the kind of
Sure.
like ninja skill that I developed over time of having to explain this to people. But I get parents need to have, or even friends or family, actually, friends and family is a common one. They need
Is,
to
yeah.
know more than the parents. Um, but I get that. And I also understand the value of it from a personal perspective of having that label. When I look through my misdiagnosis history, I know that when I got my actual diagnosis, that label, it was the bridge of understanding which sent me into, okay,
Mm,
I've got a practical toolkit. But I don't know whether that was label, actually specific diagnosis, or whether it was a different lens through which to look, because that's what sent me
mm,
into nervous system and all of the links between things. So I always thought, oh, it was the specific label. And actually, I don't know. It was just a different lens of understanding. And I found this a lot with my families who used to come in to see me in clinic. It was like, if I can just niche them into looking in a different way, suddenly the whole perspective on their, often when they walked into my office, it was their problem child.
mm,
Not because they wanted to think that, but because they were on the struggle bus, like you just said. And it's like, I must be failing as a parent because I can't get this right for my child. And I had a policy of absolutely no parent guilt in my practice. There was
mm,
just, I had no time for it because it wasn't accurate. Their child, anyone, if anyone's listening to this and they have a child who fits into any of the categories that we've spoken about, your child is having a biologically appropriate reaction to the world that its nervous system is perceiving.
mm.
That's it. And so if we can start from that place and then understand, okay, so there's a twofold approach. We need to understand the world that it's being perceived, but we also need to understand what is influencing their nervous system and its orientation to threat versus safety.
Mm. I love that because right, our bodies are always trying to do their best by us,
Yes.
and that's a really beautiful way that you put that. Can you say a little bit about what you notice shift for the parents and or the family dynamic as these things are as the interventions start to take place and progress starts to be made for a
Mm.
kiddo? Because my experience was very much I mean my whole parenting style really shifted after I realized what was happening for my kiddo.
Sure.
So I'd be interested to know what that looks like as people maybe co-regulate or shift their own styles and those types of things.
You just nailed it. It's the co-regulation, which is why I loved our first discussion where you were like sharing with me how it's self first, all the stuff you do at Total Potential. Because I was like, well, that makes total sense because the way I coach my parents is I know that you're stressed about this situation. I get it. You can be stressed with me, but
Mm,
not with your child because your child is feeling the vibration of your stress. So if you're approaching a mealtime, a playtime, a bath time, a bedtime, a problem time that is historically behaviorally difficult, and your whole orientation is what's going to happen,
mm.
what do we think we're bringing into the environment with the child? Now it's difficult to get from, oh, what's going to happen to this is going to be the most amazing, sunshine and rainbows event. And I would never kind of like say that to my parents because it's an impossible task. But curiosity was the thing that I was like, this is the only way to get through this. It's like, how about we approach every one of those potentially challenging moments with what's going to happen today? Hands off, allowing that space. Because I think a lot of our parents with children who are demonstrating any kind of stress is what's happening, the parents go, oh my God, what do I do? How can I help? How do I fix this? And they are going into stress as a feedback. And we're the adults in the room. So we have to make the choice to not go to our instinctive animalistic feedback loop mechanisms and actually be the regulated nervous system in the room. So be the nervous system that is trying to keep this kind of calm energy, even if and even as the child is feeling all the feelings.
Mm.
And the biggest thing I would say to my the parents of the children that I was working with is, just because the feelings that your child is expressing seem erratic and loud and, just disproportionate and something that we as an adult would judge, they are totally explicable to the child's nervous system.
Mm.
And the more you try and shush that, the more you are further dysregulating the situation. So as long as it's safe for the child to express, allow the expression, because it is not during the expressive moments that you're going to get to common sense with a child. And we all kind of know, like, theory of mind, it doesn't even click in till like 3. So like rationalizing with the 2-year-old, like with like logic and reason, never going to work. But even as with older children, the whole nervous system, when they're in a state of emotional, what looks like dysregulation, but is actually just their own kind of way of processing, is not focused on cognitive thought. So you can't have that conversation then of, what are you feeling, dear? Like, like, should we talk about better ways to approach this feeling expression thing?
Mm.
It's about letting that feeling, that whole cascade of feeling happen, and trusting that your child will self-regulate. It may take longer than you might hope for or anticipate, but it's actually an innate part of our nervous system to go into emotional heightenedness of whatever, and then allow for that expression to be released and the re-regulation to happen quite naturally. The problem that we have in modern society for adults and for children is we try and interrupt that and go, calm down, like I can't cry, I can't be emotional in this setting. If you allow the child to have that cascade and then love on it, like however that happens. So you basically hold, nurture, allow for that expression to have taken place without judgment, shame, criticism, or even immediate attempts to go, well, what was that about? It's because that hugging, that end point of an emotional expression where you nurture them, is still part of the emotional outburst. And it's after that where we try and go, well, okay, what were you feeling? And actually be intrigued about what they were feeling. Yeah. Their language won't be adult level narrative, although adults and emotions, we are terrible. We have like 3 words for emotions. Like, I have to give my adult clients like this wheel of emotions so they get more of a vocabulary. But children tend to give you a somatic explanation, not just an emotional one, which is brilliant. It's what we should all do. So they tend to say, I was feeling like this really nervy tummy. Great. You've got information that is about the frequency that the child was feeling and where. And you can pay attention to that and actually allow that to be something that is an early warning trigger for you. And you develop language with your child. It's like, when you get that nervy tummy again, can you come and tell mummy? Can you come and tell daddy? Yeah. And you start to have this kind of like process of intrigue for you and your child around, what are the triggers? What's actually happening in your child's world? Because us, from our grown-up adult perspectives, we can think we know, but we have no idea.
Yeah, we have no idea. I just love this so much because my sense is that this day and age, we have almost been conditioned, set up for non-feelingness. And it feels really bad and no one likes it. It feels horrible. And so we have, and there's no judgment, there's no criticism, nothing. We have a generation of parents who have kids who are taught to specifically not feel. Oh, you don't like that? Here's your iPad. Oh, you don't like that? We're going to hop in the car and run to the next thing. There's all these band-aids that are put over the top of feelings. And really, my thought is our kids have the superpower. We have so much to learn from them because they still have feelings.
Yes. Oh, 1,000%. And not feeling is the definition of being traumatized. So everything to do with feeling is a natural, innate expression of humanness. and actually animalness. We are supposed to be experiencing the fullness of our chemistry. Everything we do to not feel the fullness of our chemistry, from work addiction, numbing with television or substances, or just that self-regulation of, oh, not a good time to actually express that, let's just bottle that all up inside me. All of that suppresses the reality that you are living through in that present moment. And that's actually the definition of, well, it's not the definition of trauma, but it's actually a way to reinforce trauma. It's that
Mhm.
kind of like sense of what you're experiencing, not okay. And it's like, but that's not the children. That is absolutely, as you say, it's the parents. It's my generation. It's this kind of sense of, and it's not this Victorian era repression. It's actually, in order to socially survive in this world, we have to be Instagram perfect, always have the perfect kind of look of things. And even this like vulnerability vibe on Instagram, it's false vulnerability. It's like, I'm going to air my dirty laundry because it's the way to get attention and likes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's, the whole thing is like, but then when you bring that into the parenting dynamic, we have so many ways to not parent these days. Here's the iPad,
So
here's the
many.
next event, here's the, social gathering. Why don't I just farm you off on the friend train or whatever?
Yeah.
Or, why don't we just, you'll have a treat next time we do this if you just do this thing and stop crying right now.
Yeah.
And also this sense that everyone's parents, by making their children responsible for the things that they do that affect other people's feelings. So, please apologize to your friend who you made feel sad. It's teaching this entirely wrong dynamic of, you made somebody else feel like X, therefore emotions are able to be instigated in other people.
Yeah.
And none of this is accurate. Like, our children do things, other children feel things, of course, take responsibility for actions, especially where pain was caused, etc. But it's not, you made somebody feel X, it's, you did something and that was a bit unsafe in that situation, please don't do that again, without any, you made somebody feel X. Because all
Yeah.
of this is like, oh gosh, I can't do anything because I'll make somebody feel something, which isn't
Right.
true.
And then we're all going to need iPads and treats afterward. What are we going to do?
Right. Yes. If I'm a good person, I will get my numbing reward. Like, what happened to gold stars on the fridge?
I'm excited that this podcast is brought to you by mkforhealth.com. Have you been looking for a powerful antioxidant to help support your immune health? Hello, of course we have. Look no further. mkforhealth.com offers an amazing product called Nutrimetrics OPC3. This product is an isotonic capable food supplement chock full of powerhouse antioxidants. Ingredients like citrus extract bioflavonoids, bilberry, grapeseed, red wine, and pine bark extracts, all incredible antioxidants. Then you have the OPCs. The oligomeric proanthocyanidins are bioflavonoids found in fruits, vegetables, and certain tree barks that have exceptional benefit to the human body. Studies have shown that these OPCs are up to 20 times more powerful than vitamin C and 50 times more powerful than vitamin E in neutralizing free radicals. Hello, sign me up for that. Nutrimetrics OPC3 also contains the only isotonic form of pygaginol in the world. Number 1, remember, isotonic, readily absorbed. Number 2, pygaginol, my new favorite word, is a natural plant extract from the bark of a French maritime pine tree, and it is the most clinically researched and potent bioflavonoid found. If you're ready to support your immune health and modulate inflammation in your system, all with incredible powerhouse antioxidants, natural extracts, and ingredients, this is your product. Go to www.mkforhealth.com to purchase your Nutrimetrics OPC3 today. That's www.mk, the number 4, health.com.
Oh my goodness, I could just die. I tell you. Well, I mean, I think the real, I love that you use the word curiosity and how that can be just an absolute superpower as a parent. Just
Mm,
assume you know nothing and ask questions, right? Because
yes.
probably we don't know is the
Yeah.
truth of it. So
Yeah.
that's beautiful. The co-regulation, the opportunity to really see the gut and the nervous system as this interplay that has potentially a lot of answers and support that a child can receive if they really, kind of are willing to get in there and dive through some of that.
Mhm.
I just love all of it. Okay. Now you have an expertise in areas that I am not familiar with. And I'm assuming that these also play into the work you do with children, but also with adults. And so I have to know more about the work you do with human design and the gene keys, which even that phrase I had actually never heard before. And I saw the map of it on one of your websites and was like, my mind was blown. So
Yes.
I need to know more about these and how
Yeah.
they then fold into the work that you do.
And it's so interesting because for the longest time, I wasn't using human design with my children because it was a bit of a weird technology kind of woo-woo thing, which parents didn't love to translate, but now it's starting to gain popularity. So human design is essentially a bit like astrology in ways, in terms of it takes planetary alignments and it gives an indication as to where people are supposed to have strengths and
Mm.
openness to the world around them. This is a superpower for parents because there are essentially four really types that it's a mechanical system. It all forms into body graphs and things like that. But essentially, if you know what your child's design is what we call it, essentially just their type, you don't need all of the complexities, but you kind of then know how to nurture your child's resonance with the world around them.
Mm.
And at its simplest, the four types are determined by their four auras. So how their energy map tends to slot in like a puzzle piece to the world around them. And each of those four types has a different way of going about the way they do things. So we have manifestors who are just designed to go off and do things, which sounds great, but to a parent is like, oh my God, please stop. Like these are the kids who are going to jump off the nearest high thing and like run across the road. That's your manifestor child. And so parenting a manifestor can be this, oh my God, please stop, please don't, please, which is obviously terrible for the manifestor child because it's all of its intuition and its initiation capacity is being kind of beaten out of it. Not obviously
Yeah.
literally, but just in a sense. So the key to manifestors is training them to ask for permission. Mummy, can I go and jump off this really high building? Mummy, can I go and like run across this road? If you get your manifestor child to ask for permission, you can empower their initiative without always suffocating their kind of expression.
Yeah.
Generators are here to respond. So they're here to actually be asked yes or no questions and use their body to say yes or no. And as a parent of a generator, you get to really feel into, okay, that's a no, I don't want to do it because it's my homework, or versus I really want to go to the cinema today rather than the skate park. And you'll get to feel that sense. And they're supposed to be where their body wants to be, not where you as the parent think they want to be. Like, do you want to do piano lessons? Do you want to do violin lessons? Yeah. That's amazing. It's like, great. Just give your children tons of options and they can respond without us feeling as parents like we need to like
Yeah,
make them
like
go down
guide
a
or pick
specific.
choice. Yeah,
Yeah.
choose.
Yeah,
Okay.
so generators need the smorgasbord of options to respond to, and it's all yes or no questions. It's not, do you want to do violin or piano? It's ask one, get a response, ask the next, get a response.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Projectors are here to be invited. So would you like to come to the park with mummy and daddy today? Sounds weird, but you're actually inviting your projector child to have a sense of autonomy, because projectors are here to be really insightful. Projectors can be really overwhelming to have as children because they're very intuitive and they kind of know exactly what's happening. So they're here to give insights and wisdom as they get older, but as such, they really need to be invited and recognized. So your projector children are the ones that need to be praised and loved on and praised for the work they do, their output, their givingness, their character, just recognized for who they are. So they keep wanting to give of themselves. That's your projectors.
Wow.
And your reflectors are kind of weird. They're less than 1%. So many people won't have reflectors, but reflectors are very, they can get very lost in the reality of the world. So they essentially need to be allowed lots of space to explore and experiment their own creativity and flexibility and flow, and to basically be very tuned to nature to get through making decisions around things. So with reflector children, it's about creating lots of space for them to truly examine and explore who they are. And that's just
I'm gonna
this
have to
much.
reach out to you for a conversation about this on non-podcast time, because holy
Right.
buckets. Okay.
You
Well, this
can
is
get free
fascinating.
profiles. I will give you the reason I gave you that information is so that all of your listeners can actually get free profiles on
Okay.
lots of online platforms. So I will give you the email address where people get free profiles, and it will give you the type, so you will know the type of your child just by plugging it into a free online thing. Obviously, if you want to go deeper, and this can be so impactful if a parent has a problem child, quote unquote, it's typically because their auras, like the design of the parent, is so overwhelming to the child that it's completely like impossible to regulate without having a bit more information. That's how I tend to use it with families.
Yeah, my wheels are spinning already because I love
You've
my
already
daughter to
you've
the
already
moon and
typed your
back.
children.
She's the spiciest thing since I don't know what, but I'm super cognizant that we are mismatched in some way, and I keep like
Yeah.
trying to find where is the alignment and how do I support her, because she's got magic inside of her.
Sure.
And there's times it's really expressive, but there's times where I'm like, something is off here. So
Yeah, we are not bridging this connective gap
yeah,
today.
yes.
Yeah. Yes.
Wow. Okay. Awesome. So that's the human design. And then what about the gene keys?
Gene keys. So Gene Keys is an affiliated system. It uses the same planetary like data sets, but pops it into a different set of information. Gene Keys is almost less relevant for children, but super relevant for adults. It's much more a contemplation about the energetic archetypes we're here to play out in life. And so anyone who's like struggled with their life's purpose or their trigger patterns, so we can do wound sequencing and in the Venus sequence of the Gene Keys, which is very much about when I am triggered, this is exactly how I shut myself down. And when you know this about yourself, I actually was doing a live training for my academy the other day, and I was using my design as an example for Gene Keys, and I was doing my Venus sequence, and I was like saying it out loud and thinking, oh my goodness, this is exactly what I did last week with this person in this situation. I was like, oh my God, I feel so seen by myself in a way I didn't realize. It was but Gene Keys, you can, and particularly the Venus sequence, which is kind of in the outer planets, it's in like Mars and Venus planetary alignments. You can see how through thematics you break down. So do you like repress yourself? Do you deny things? Do you try and escape? Do you put up walls? Do you try and tell everyone else what to do? Or do you just detach and like disappear? Knowing that little bit about yourself, you can actually go, okay, so when I do that thing, I know I'm in a triggered space. What have I done here? Like, what's happened? And it's more self-awareness for adults, especially because children are the biggest triggers in our world. So yeah, it's one of those really interesting things. And again, genekeys.com, you can get your free hologenetic profile. You can look into some of these themes, and there's lots of resources available there if people just want to find out a bit more.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. Well, my wheels have been spinning this whole entire time and now are maybe spinning even more. But for all the listeners who have their own wheels spinning, where should they go to find out more about you and the work that you're doing and resources, all that good stuff?
Sure. So we don't make it very easy because I've got so many different factions to my work that I put it in many different places, but all of my clinical work where I do take pediatrics and globally. So the one thing to say is if there is a gastrointestinal issue or something like that, there are clinical gut biome tests that can help with parents, but they need to be interpreted specially because pediatric gut biomes are still in flux. So that's another reason why a lot of functional medicine practitioners avoid it, because they haven't studied what happens in a child's gut biome. But I do offer US, but also global based support for pediatrics still. All of that, my company is called Alethea Clinic, but all of that can actually be found at a short link because nobody can spell Alethea, which is fine. So it's at a bit.ly link, which is bit.ly/truth clinic, and that will take you to the Alethea Clinic website. That's where all my clinical work is. If anyone's interested in the human design and gene key stuff and family readings and partnership readings and all that kind of stuff, that all lives under unveilhumandesign.com.
Awesome.
And then you can stalk me on the interwebs. I'm just Victoria L. Fenton on Instagram. Instagram's where I hang out most.
Stalk me on the that's hilarious.
Well,
Awesome.
That's what people do these days, isn't it? Don't we all stalk everyone on the interwebs?
Such a bizarre world out there.
know.
You know, when you were mentioning earlier about just sort of the perfectness that is, you know, what you're supposed to display in social media or the faux vulnerability, I often think to myself, who is the person who is in the middle of crying their eyes out about something and is like, you know what? Let me catch this for Instagram.
Let me just do a selfie quickly.
God. Like there has never been a time in my life where I have been just down in the dumps. And I'm like, this needs to be on video.
Not truthfully. And it's
So
interesting because I
bizarre.
watched some people do it, and and I can tell they're genuinely in a space,
Yeah.
but that very insertion of, oh, let me capture this for social media is preventing them from really getting down to the true feeling. And
Yeah.
it's like, and I have no judgment. You mentioned it earlier, and I really should say this. There is just that there's no judgment, because
No, we're all
that's
just
your
doing our
safety
best.
blanket. But
Yeah.
it's your safety blanket. If you're not ready to feel the feels and you need that insertion of, oh, social media moment,
Yeah.
then that's your safety blanket right now. I watched like 4 episodes of a Netflix show last night. So it was my safety blanket. I couldn't switch it off. Like, there was just, and I know that, and I'm totally
Yeah.
okay with
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
But there is just that, it's always safe to feel your feelings, I think, is the thing. It's always safe for your children to feel their feelings. It's always safe for us to feel our feelings. And the moment we don't feel it safe, that's okay too. Titration. Away
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
back is the way to do it.
Yeah. I love that. All right, Victoria, thank you so much. I literally could have talked to you like the rest of the day. So I appreciate very much your time.
No, thank you.
And yeah, we'll share all of your links and whatnot in the show notes. But
Sure.
thank you to everybody for listening, and Victoria for being here. And we will catch you guys all next time.